Hey, what's up guys? JB here. Final Fantasy VIII is returning this week to War of the Visions, and along with it, a brand new character is going to be joining the fray, and it is none other than the antagonist for at least part of the game, which is Seifer. Now, personally, I wasn't really ever a huge fan of this character in the original game. I never really thought that his story arc was super well developed or made a ton of sense. That said, I really do like what they've done here, in terms of his character design, and I am a big fan of that original game, so I am excited for him to be coming in here this week. Now, he will be joining this PvP landscape as yet another physical slasher in a meta that is just chock full of them. So what exactly is he bringing to the game that is going to make him a compelling investment? Well, let's dive into his kit and let's find out. Seifer is joining War of the Visions as a 100 cost dark unit. He will be repping that Sword B warrior class, the first addition to that job since early this year with Light of Brilliance Lucio. He has base 3-1 movement and he wears hats and cloth. Taking a look here at the TMR, this one provides a 50% reaction block, as well as an on-hit imbued effect of 10% reduced physical damage. Now this one does get buffed onto not only yourself, but an ally as well, and they can be up to 4 squares away from you, so it is a pretty nice targeting radius. I do actually like this TMR here quite a bit, since at least that secondary imbued portion of the effect is not dispellable in the game currently, which is actually a rarity for these TMR effects, and we are still currently in a very heavy physical based meta, so the effect here is actually pretty nice, I think. The downside here with this one is that it is a cloth armor piece, so you do have to consider that in terms of who's able to use it as well as what you're able to use it with, because it does take up that slot for you. Overall though, I do think it's a nice piece. Taking a look at his stats here next, and has a strong overall stat line above even the next generation averages that have been built so far in the majority of these categories. Very high in his HP, agility, and accuracy. His attack value is a little bit less, admittedly, than we've seen on some of the recent units, but he does have some passives that are able to increase that. On top of that, he won't really be a crit hit monster like some of the other recent units that we've been seeing lately. He is going to be much closer to the average in both of those areas. Overall though, no significant weaknesses here, and his innate stats are setting him up perfectly to do his job, which is to be a frontline bruiser. For the defensive picture, we have 6 defense and 0 spirit, a large 25% slash resistance, and then a more modest 10 against both strike and magic. And then he rounds out the positive resistances there with 5 against missile. He is carrying just a single weakness here. It is against pierce damage, and it's coming in at a -10 value. For the ailment resistances, he's got 50% against frostbite, pretty relevant in the current game's meta with Gilgamesh and his limit burst, so I do like that quite a bit. The other ones aren't really going to be super relevant, at least for right now. He does have 50% against charm and 10% against poison, so not really ones that we're seeing widely at the moment. For his mastery ability, he's going to be getting 20% slash res pen as well as a whopping 40% reaction block, so that is a very good start. If you do then take him up to level 140, he's picking up a 15% area resist as well as 15% accuracy. So no complaints there with the masteries, all very nice effects coming in. As for his passive abilities, his main one is going to get him that 40% defense pen and slash res pen in the same ability, so that is quite good. It does add on there that 15% wide guard effect against both physical and magical. So of course that is going to give him just a little bit of layered mitigation there against those larger diamond AoEs. So that passive, it's definitely a no-brainer. That's an always on. As for what you would run alongside that one, honestly he's got a lot of great options. I think personally my favorite one is the one that does give him that attack accuracy as well as the reduced AP consumption. But he does have an agility passive which you could certainly use, or a second defense pen passive which if you really wanted to bust up those tanks or high defense units, that's the way that you'd want to go. As for his counter ability, also very nice, especially in this slash heavy meta that we're currently experiencing. I believe this is actually the same exact one that Squall had when he was first released. This one's going to give that massive 40% damage reduction against both slash and strike attacks. Alright guys, let's take a look at the main kit, and we're going to start off here with his buffs. His self buff is going to provide a 40% attack, a 10% AP auto restore, and imbues his attacks with a 20 healing power debuff. As we know with those on-hit effects, they do stack with any debuff effects from your skills, so this is a nice perk for this current sort of heavy healing, self-sustained meta at the moment. The AP restore here is really going to be the entirety of his AP management. If it does get dispelled early in the fight, it is going to make a pretty significant dent in his AP, in terms of what he's able to do with his skills. As we're going to see here in the main kit, his attacks are actually quite expensive. It's another reason why I do like that AP consumption passive that we looked at, is just sort of a bit of insurance, for those people that do happen to be running those Veritas of the Wind TMRs out there. Now his party buff up here next, as we've seen with many of the recent units, it's absolutely incredible. And this buff is really going to be the entirety of the survivability of this unit in one buff. It's going to provide him a 50% general barrier, meaning that it works against either physical or magical attacks. The barrier, though, here is unique, in terms of what we've been seeing as of late. This one is going to be active for a full 4 turns rather than the ones that are either exhausted by an HP or a hit count that have been sort of the more common ones that we've seen over the history of the game to this point. So basically, as long as you're within that 4-turn threshold, you can hit him as many times as you want. He's going to be getting that full 50% damage mitigation, so that's actually very, very strong. That is not all that this buff does, though. It does a lot more. On top of that, he's going to get a 15% human resistance, an auto heal back for himself, which triggers at 50% HP, and then a 50% damage absorption effect added on to his attacks, similar to what we saw with Juum the Celestial. Now, he does have 3 additional effects here, which will be passed on to the party. This buff is insane, guys. 25% physical and magical wide guard, and an imbue effect that will decrease the debuff weakening of your targets by 30. And that last part there, I think, is especially important, especially against some of the recent teams that have sort of risen to prominence, like Red Mage and Katana. Those groups in particular, they do have the ability to get very high debuff weakening, sort of really taking the bite out of the imperils and debuffs that you try to apply onto them. So this buff here is going to be, sort of some counterplay against that. Moving now into his attack skills, his low AP finisher is a range 2, range height 1, just a single effect on this one, and it will shut off any reaction abilities of your target prior to the damage. So this one's fine enough, maybe it does save you from a reflex or a preemptive counter sort of in the mid-fight as you go to finish somebody off. However, Seifer does have access to a very high level of reaction block, so I'm not really sure how valuable that really is. His second attack here is going to be another unit-based attack. It's getting up to a range of 4, again with a range height of 1, this time coming in with that extra large 240% modifier. This one is also going to be a 2-hit chaining attack. Now, prior to the damage, this will actually dispel any debuffs that are currently present on Seifer himself. So it could be a pretty nice boon for the middle of the fight. Maybe if you've picked up a couple of debuffs, over the course of the first few turns, this maybe could be enough to swing you there and sort of set the tide in your favor. Now the third skill here is definitely going to be his marquee attack. This one's going to be topping out at a range of 6 on the large cross with a large 200% modifier. Prior to the damage, this is going to dispel any physical or general barriers present on the target. It will then also dispel re-raise. It's also going to debuff the targets with a 60% area resist crush, and then post damage he will also apply a 50 healing power debuff, which would actually go to 70 if you do include that on-hit imbued effect from his self buff. Barrier breaking is so important in the current meta with many of the recent units with 4-hit barriers or HP barriers, and this having that large calculated Ren style targeting pattern, it definitely is going to ensure that you're most likely going to be hitting multiple units with this, so very, very strong skill. Final one here, especially comparatively, is going to be a bit more mundane. This one's getting up to a range of 4 on the cross AoE. It does have that large 200% modifier once again. And it is just a bit basic here because there is no actual utility on the skill other than being a guaranteed hit ability. It's fine, I guess, it's nice to have a guaranteed hit to fall back on against maybe an insanely evasive unit. However, I had kind of a similar reaction to Kadaj's Vortex ability when that first dropped. This one here is pretty much an identical skill to that one. I think though that it just would have been nice to see maybe some different utility here because the innate accuracy on Seifer and Kadaj for that matter is just so strong to begin with. Now last but not least, we do have the Limit Burst. This is a single target, range of 4, the range height of 1. Prior to the damage, we have a general dispel, a 60% unit resistance crush, meaning that Seifer here has access to both types, which is actually very nice and unique in the game. It does also then restore 10 AP on use, making this effectively a 33 AP cost limit burst. So again, we have 2 pretty useful utility effects here. Dispel, always great, especially with these crazy buffs that have been coming in. This one I think is going to be more maybe to set up your team or maybe for tank busting with that unit resistance crush. I think in most cases he's going to be leaning towards those area of effect attacks. Overall, it's a pretty nice kit. I do think it's going to be competitive for the current meta. I think really the only things missing for me are going to be any sort of stealing effects to maybe protect some of his innate statuses, or maybe even a secondary survival mechanic beyond, once that barrier may be broken or is worn off. So something like a courage or a re-raise. Because certainly it is possible, if the damage does line up properly for the enemy, that, maybe they do take you down to a 55 or 60% HP threshold, not quite proccing that heal back, and then the next unit comes back and is able to cut him down on the chain. So I think having that extra added layer of insurance for that situation is definitely one of the main concerns for this unit. Now, the second week of the collaboration is going to be a brand new vision card that will be coming out for Seifer, and this one is going to be touching on the Fist group, Seifer's own Sword B Warrior, and then the Sword C Knight group as well. Highlights on the base stats include 13 luck, as well as 5% agility in the bestowed. The holo effect on this one is for the quest mode. Unfortunately, the least desirable of the three, in my opinion, because really there is just no incentive to use job-based teams, or job cards for that matter, in the PvE events. And until then, I do think that these holo quest mode bonuses are completely irrelevant. That aside, I do think the rest of the card is excellent. It is the first area resist card not only for the warrior group, but also for knights. And it is going to be coming in at that highest you can be, 24% value. In addition to that, we are going to be picking up some slash resist as well as a 25 human killer mod. So I would say if you get nothing else from this collaboration, it's definitely worth considering trying to get this vision card. I do think it's going to be an important one going into the future, especially for those two jobs. Now, speaking of that, this is where the warrior group stands as it is today. Honestly, not all that well developed in comparison to many of the others. Only 15 cards for the group, including Fina's, which did come out recently in JP. We should be looking at that in probably another 2 to 3 weeks. There hasn't been a ton of unit development for this group either. As we mentioned earlier in the video, Lucio the Luminescent was the most recent unit, and that was about, I think, 6 months ago or so. The rest of the units here are pretty power crept and outdated at this point, the tanks even as well. The only other viable units, in my opinion, are going to be that Lucio unit and then Bartz, who came out during Final Fantasy V last year. And neither of them, I would say, are going to be top meta picks at the moment. Although I do think Seifer coming in certainly raises the tides for those units, and I can certainly see, prospects raising for them considerably. Now, there was also a bit of news in JP this week. A brand new 70 cost dark unit in Sonil was released. The best part is she's actually a free grindable unit. She does even have next-gen stats on top of that. So I think for anybody investing in this group, investing into Seifer, that's certainly something very nice to look forward to and maybe another potential partner for him. I would say, though, that this job is still in need of further development, even despite of that. I would like to see another couple of cards here, maybe extending some of the overlap and partners that they work with, and probably another significant unit before I would consider this a top mono job team out there in the meta. For now, I think the best results are going to be working with some of those other partner groups, and Warrior does have some good options for that. Greatsword, I think, is the most developed at this point with 6 cards, but the Knight, Black Mage, and even the Red Mage groups are also pretty workable as well. Alright guys, on to the mock builds, and this first one is going to be a semi-evasion build. Seifer, with his strong base luck value, is going to be a great candidate for that style of build, especially since the warrior card set does enable that very well. It's among the best in the game for that. So in this build, I will be pairing him with who I think is a pretty nice partner for him in Ashen Mons from the Knight group. And in the third slot, I am going to be bringing in Bartz here to kind of extend that follow-up action here for the team, and especially to capitalize on the human killer that I've built up here with the vision cards. Now, if you don't have Bartz or you didn't develop him, I do think that Lucio the Luminescent is certainly another good option here. He can provide some nice dispel effects for the team, which is kind of some missing utility. The new Sonil unit that we did provide is going to kind of double down on that evasion, so that's something that we can look forward to here maybe in another month or so. As for the equipment, I am going to be using his Gunblade Hyperion that will be coming in with the event. I think in most cases I do like the Blood Sword for him better, but in this case I do already have that on Mons to enhance his follow-up, so I'm going to be using that next best option here. I'm going to be pairing that with the Winter's Clothes to really enhance that evasion value, and then I'll pair that up with an evade-centric TMR, also providing some agility. For an Esper, I'm going to be going with Dark Ifrit. In addition to the evasion that it provides, it does get him that 10 ice resistance for the Gilgamesh matchup, but also a nice healthy dose of the reaction block there on top of it. For the vision cards, this build heavily relies on 2 limited time vision cards to make it work. The first and foremost being that Halloween Lucio card for the agility and the luck, and then Yuffie's vision card for the raw evasion. And that's going to be providing all that you need for your evasion needs just across those 2 card slots. Unfortunately, if you don't have those vision cards, I'm going to say that this build isn't really going to be all that viable. If you do have them though, it certainly takes this unit to the next level and amplifies what he's able to do, gives him an additional layer of survivability in the form of that evasion. And certainly, as you can see in the stats, he is able to get incredibly evasive, 325% raw evasion rate here. And remember, this is at 0 reincarnations. If you did happen to max him out, you can maybe get roughly another 18 to 19 and add that on top of it. So it's not quite reaching the levels of a Yuffie or a Halloween Lucio, but really it's not all that far off. Certainly if you were able to bring in an evasion buff, that's going to amplify this even further. So, all right, we got a second build here. It's going to be an alternative option, and I think this one's going to be maybe just a little bit more accessible, maybe for folks who kind of invested into Cloud, maybe came in for that collaboration, and then maybe pulled on Luciel here this past week. So this one is going to be exploring that synergy here between the Warrior, Greatsword, and Devout groups. Now, if you didn't happen to go for Luciel, I think interchangeable in that slot is going to be White Lotus Fina, who we do expect to see here, within the next couple of weeks. She may even be better for some matchups. Now, in this particular build, we do have a bit more of a focus on accuracy and damage, particularly with Cloud's Vision card providing that unit resistance and the attack value. And then the Dark Bahamut card is going to provide us that area resistance and slash attack for the dark and light units. Those cards, of course, aren't going to be covering Luciel. Honestly, I'm not super concerned about it. That is one of the benefits of a dedicated support unit. They're able to kind of, sort of do their thing in the back and not worry about getting hit too much, at least until the end of the fight. For Trust Stones on this unit, I do like HP for bulk, luck for the evasion and accuracy. Agility on the right side should have you covered for most situations. If you are interested in seeing the finer details on these builds, as always, I will include a link to both of them in the description below. So what is my verdict today on Seifer? Starting with the positives, this is the best barrier breaker that we've seen in the game since King Bradley. And the incredible thing about it is that on that same barrier breaking attack, he's also taking away your re-raise and debuffing your area resistant healing power all at the same time. The overall utility compression there is unmatched in the current game, as barriers have recently been one of the best ways to slow down and stop incoming damage. So I would say that skill alone makes this unit worth using, but on top of that, he is going to be a very competitive bruiser, right there with Jum and Sephiroth and some of the others from this generation, with access to strong penetration levels, a good level of overall bulk and sustain, offering a complete package for dealing with one of the strongest overall teams in the game right now, which is Sephiroth and Gilgamesh. If that weren't enough, the cherry on top for this unit is going to be the potential for very high accuracy and evasion, if you do have the pieces to support it, adding another dimension to how this unit can be played and deployed. On the more negative side, despite being innately bulky with his barrier and innate resistances, if you are able to break that barrier, this unit does become much more pedestrian in his survivability. At that point, he's going to be relying purely on that heal back and damage absorption capability, as he doesn't have any innate courage or re-raise to bail him out. Another potential problem area for this unit is lack of any elemental imperil in his kit, so he certainly will be wary of units carrying high dark resistance, and there are a number of them currently in the meta that are able to achieve that. Units like Sephiroth, Kadaj, even Cloud are a few that come to mind with the vision cards that they'd have access to. Lastly, as I did highlight within that job overview, the warrior group currently is a bit underdeveloped, which I do think will be detrimental to the short-term prospects for this unit, until we get another piece or two to help prop up that group, or maybe some of the overlapped groups that he works with. In that regard, I do view it very similar to A2's situation when she first dropped for the Greatsword group. At the end of the day, despite those weaknesses, I do consider this a strong and competitive unit, offering a mix of compelling utility and debuffing, not quite matched by any other unit in the meta currently. And I do think for folks who invested in units like Cloud or Ashen Mon specifically, he is going to offer a way to extend their value and propel them forward in the game. Now, considering all that, is this going to be a must-pull unit? Is this going to be the next guy that's going to be in each and every team out there in Arena and Guild Wars? In my opinion, I don't think so. I think that we have seen some nice results from him over on the JP side. However, they were relatively short-lived, and he's already sort of fallen off a cliff considerably with the release of the new Wind Mage Shrek. Even despite of that though, I don't think that that will be the last that we'll be hearing from Seifer, as I think that there will be space in the game for the utility that he offers for some time to come. So that is it, guys. Those are my thoughts today on Seifer. And I do think this is absolutely going to be a case where that 1 month of foresight that we have here on Global is going to be extremely valuable for us, especially for those people who aren't looking to pull each and every unit and are looking to really extend the value for the units that they do pull. Because we've already seen the effect that Shrek is having on the meta over there, where she has been a transformative unit, at least so far. And honestly, it has only been a couple of weeks. But really, it hasn't been all that long since Seifer did drop for them, and really he's fallen into the background at this point, and his use rate has fallen off quite considerably. Now that is not to say at all that Seifer is a bad unit. In fact, I think exactly the opposite. He's very strong and he's a worthy unit. It's just that that particular matchup is not going to be ideal for him. So like I said, the short-term value may not exactly be there for him. I think had we not known about that and not had that short glimpse into the future, perhaps some players out there may have been disappointed in Seifer and sort of the quick turnaround in the meta that did occur. Like I said though, the kit of this unit is just too strong to be held down for too long. The next Axe or Knight unit that comes through could completely vindicate this unit and no doubt bring him right back to the forefront. We just can't say exactly when that might happen, but I can certainly envision a bright future for him. Let me know what you guys think about all that in the comments down below. Are you going to be going for Seifer? Are you all in for Shrek? Or are your chips in the corner of the new summer unit, whomever it may be? While you're down there, if you did enjoy the video today, hit that like button for me. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you like what I'm doing here on the channel, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. And that's really all that I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.